Okay, we're going to start on some of the other models because, as we move throughout the world, every city has a little different model, right? Models are based upon kind of what the average city looks like, but those models take into consideration the history and the culture of an area as well. And when we get into areas of Latin America in particular, we're looking at heavy Spanish Portuguese influence from their colonial times. Our models are a little different because we have different influences and different cultures, right? Latin American models reflect some of that colonial history. In particular, if you go to a Spanish or a Portuguese town, a lot of times because of the influence of the church, right, you're going to have the church kind of be as the center of the city, right? It has that big area in front of it, the plaza, that is the center of town. It has markets and festivals and celebrations will take place in that area because of the fact that in Catholic Christian towns of Spain and Portugal, you're going to have all of these cathedrals in the center of town, and it was meant to be the center of life, right? Not just the center of architecture, but the center of culture and how people live their lives. So they brought that with them, right, through relocation diffusion. They brought that with them as they went to various areas around the world. All right, so in this mall area down here, if you remember the one that we have in our book, right, you have the church here and this long area in the middle, this area where you have that big plaza, those areas of celebration, right? While we typically have nicer homes outside of the CBD, right? In Latin American towns, you're going to have this area here, this elite section. This is where the wealthy live because you want to be seen. You want to have your big, beautiful house, right, in the middle of town. And you'll see that in a lot of European cities because a lot of Europeans, the wealthy, live near the town. All right, you will have a CBD here in the middle. Like you have in many other cities, including North American cities. But behind it, you have that market, that traditional area that's a lot of culture, all right, where people still, go every day to buy their fresh fruits and vegetables and maybe hand goods. And it's also kind of a tourist area as well. All right, a little different here you'll see in Latin American cities is you have a very small middle class residential, not very big like you would have in a lot of other areas. And we know, tying that back into core and periphery, that in core areas where you have that higher level of technology and income and what have you, you often have a very strong middle class. And the middle class here is very small. Right? It's not going to be very big. And in fact, when you go to other areas, you're not going to really find much of a middle class at all. Right? You have these areas in here, right? And a zone of maturity is the older part of town, which is undergoing gentrification. We'll talk about gentrification a little further down in this unit, right? So these are some older homes that probably need a bunch of work, right? And as you move out from this area, you're going to find areas of favelas or slums, right? Areas that disamenity centers, right? Amenity is something nice, like you get at a hotel. You ask what the amenities are. This area, they don't have amenities. It's a disamenity center. So you don't even have things like electricity and water, police and fire services here, and maybe not even a school area. And then as you get out further, more squatter settlements. The industrial area comes off the CBD and is located outside, right? So be able to talk about the fact that the poor live outside of the city in Latin America, and the poor tend to live inside the city in a North American model, right? Moving on to the Asian city models, right? The Asian city models look a little differently. It's not that beautiful circle that we see with all the other models. This is more of that, looks a little sector-ish, right? Going back to Hoyt's model. Partly because in an Asian city model, you've got this port zone down here. A lot of Asian cities are ports, and so their world is kind of centered out from the port. You'll have a government area here. The government's going to be really close to that port city and not really in a CBD because of the fact that your ports, have things like exports and imports that need to have government regulations to make sure that money's being paid. You have two kind of commercial zones here. One is a Western model, right? So you have a lot of Western countries that are coming in. So anything from the United States, Canada, Western Europe. And then here you have alien, which in our book really refers to as being more of a Chinese commercial zone. Right? Remember, in a lot of Asian cities outside of China, you have Chinese diffusion, people leaving because of overpopulation or oppressive governments, right? And they are moving to various different cities within Asia, Southeast Asian areas. And then through chain migration, they're saying, telling their friends and family, come on, come here. It's a great place. And they've set up areas. So a lot of these will be heavily Chinese areas that are somewhat segregated from the rest. You do have a higher income, right? So you have high class and new high class. This is old money. This is new money, right? No, you have middle density here, meaning that it's got some lower class as well as some middle class areas. A little bit of new suburbs and some very small squatter classes. You don't see as many squatter areas in this area. In Asia. And then the last one, of course, is the market gardening zone. And this goes back to Thunen, right? To von Thunen's model. Asian diets are typically much more, a mix of fresher fruits and vegetables. Not so much processed stuff and a lot of seafood, right? So those are things you're going to shop for on a daily basis. And this is where you're going to find those things being grown. Right? The fresh fruits and vegetables are going to be grown here because you're going to incorporate that into your diet. All right, the next one we're going to move on to is the African city model. And the African city model is notable for a couple of things, right? One is that you have 3 CBD-ish areas, right? One being the traditional, right? This traditional CBD area probably started before the 1800s in the colonial areas and still exists today and still goes on today. Probably more of the more local based companies are in this area. Over here is the colonial CBD, probably started by whatever European country came in, and probably has a lot of Western companies that are in this area as well. And then here, like we saw in the Latin American cities, you have your market area, right? Very, very traditional, a place where you would, see the bazaar, right? Anything from fresh fruits and vegetables to clothing, jewelry, rugs, right? Things that are different. And even maybe this is where you'll see more of the informal economy, probably very cash basis, not necessarily something that the government can be taxing. All right, you have ethnic neighborhoods around here, very traditional neighborhoods, right? Moving out, you've got some ethnic neighborhoods, probably some of the people that are living and working in this colonial CBD, right? So you may have some foreign immigrants that are living in this area as well. But you will also have a manufacturing zone. Remember, you're probably in a peripheral area, not necessarily peripheral, but probably. And so you're going to have your businesses located close to where the people live so that they can have that ability to walk to work, right? Also, too, remember, if you want to go into primary economic activities, mining, right, and secondary economic activities, manufacturing, are very much located in peripheral and semi-peripheral areas. So you want to have, you can mention that as well, that those are located nearby. And then the informal townships tend to be kind of more of your squatter settlements as well, right? Remember, again, people are coming into the cities looking for jobs, and they don't have them. They don't have jobs. They don't have the housing. So people are going to go live in squatter settlements. All right, so those are the models, and you need to be familiar with them, right? You need to be able to speak about the different models. If you get a question about how do people live in cities, right? Well, they live like this in European cities and this in North American cities, here in Latin American, Asian, and African, right? So you need to be able to talk about that across the board and talk about similarities and differences, right? Similarities, they all have places for, lower income, middle income. There is middle income here in the African city, probably not a very large wealthy class, but in other places you have that, right? You also have that idea of secession as people, make money and leave, right? They go to another area, then you're going to have somebody else move in, right? Remember we talked about ethnic neighborhoods in New York where a poor immigrant community will set up. People will go to live there because if you're coming from a foreign country that you don't speak the language, you're going to go seek out people who are similar to you, right? People who do speak your language that can help you find a place to live, help you find a job, may have a newspaper that speaks your language, and restaurants that serve the kind of food that you're used to. But as those groups make money and move out, then other people move in, usually a lower class, and they will stay for a while, right? Very similar to when you're talking about, lower, middle, and higher income. People will, as they make more money, get up and move out. All right, let's go back to Christoller's central place theory, and I think I probably used the wrong name a couple slides back. All right, I kind of like this model. It looks very similar to the one that we have, but instead of using, city, town, village, and hamlet, it says big center, intermediate center, or small center, right? So it's kind of giving you, I think, a little more of a visual as to the sizes that we're looking at, right? Christoller based his studies on Germany. That's where he's from, right? And he wants to see how cities thrive, right? Why are some cities successful and some others are not? Remember, he's got a lot of assumptions about the soil being similar, uniform land, right? Nothing that stops you from going one place to another. Everybody has the same kind of buying power, right? So he's got some assumptions that probably you wouldn't find in the real world, but this kind of still plays out, a little bit in the real world, right? This was showing the relationship between these big cities, right? The central place. This is the central place in this particular, right, hexagon. How do all of these play together? What's the relationship? Spatial relationships. That's just such a big part of geography, right? What he's talking about here, if you're going to the central place, how far will you go? He calls it the range. How far will you go to get stuff? And in this case, people who live on the outside line, right? This is the maximum distance they'll go into the central city to get what they need. If they're on this side of the line, they're going to go somewhere else, right? In this area, right, we know it's not always the same. Some areas are much bigger than others, right? You have what Christoller calls the threshold, right? The threshold, that's the maximum number of customers you need. So in this area is the maximum number of people that you need in order for this city to be successful, right? If you don't have enough people, then that hexagon's going to get bigger, right? And then same thing for each one of these, right? The towns that are located here, right? They have their own hexagon, the black area here, right? These hexagons, for them, is their threshold and the range. How many people are located and how far will they go, right? Each one of these little areas has their own range and threshold, right? So in this intermediate or small center, the village, right, has its own hexagon, its own range, and its own area, a number of people that it will need in order for it to be successful, right? And then the last thing that sometimes you'll hear referred to in Christoller's theory is the hinterland or the market area, right? That is within this hexagon shape, right? Is how much you can sell in this area and still make it profitable, right? Remember, we have to factor in transportation costs as well. And the farther you go out, the more the transportation costs, and it eventually becomes not profitable. All right, we're going to move on here in just a second, but it's time to end this section, so we'll move on in part 3 in just a bit.